Welcome back, budgeteers. Coach Nino Villa here, disciple of Christ, husband, father, and financial coach. And today I sit down yet again with our friend, the student loan coach, Renee Earwood. Hey there, budgeteers. The new year is here, and you know what that means. It's time for fresh starts and new habits. If one of your goals is to get better with your money, New Money Habits has exactly what you need to kick things off right: the Payday Power Planner. This isn't just any budget tool. The Payday Power Planner is designed to work with your pay periods, not just the calendar month. Why does that matter? Because it helps you to see exactly when your money is coming in and going out. No surprises, no guesswork. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll know if you're working with a surplus or facing a deficit, so you can make informed decisions about your money. It's not just a plan, it's the clarity and control you've been looking for to start the new year strong. Make this the year you finally build new habits for financial freedom. Grab your free Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and take the first step toward a better financial future. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now, because this year it's time for a better plan for your money. Renee, I want to thank you for coming back and so soon.
Yeah, happy to be here as always.
I know we wanted to bring you back because there is a lot of news unfolding about student loans, and just there's kind of a lot of craziness out there. As we talked about last time, there is a lot of sensationalism in the headlines, and so there's all these headlines that just read scary things like your income is going to be garnished and you're going to lose your tax refund and this, that, and the other. So I was hoping that we could have a unsensationalized conversation to help bring everybody's anxiety around their student loans way, way down.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I thought maybe what we should start with is maybe we should define a few terms
Okay.
for our listeners, because there's a lot of student loan specific terms being thrown around, like, oh, your loan that's in deferment, or your loan that's in forbearance, or your loan that's in default. And it's like, okay, well, two of those start with the letter D, so I might mix those up from time to time. What can you tell us about deferment, forbearance, default, and any other term that's really important to know right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start with the term default, just because that's what's in the headlines right now, right? And it's probably the scariest of the
Hmm.
words. And student loan default is when you have not made a payment on your student loans for over 270 days. So that's quite a bit of time, right? So you can be behind on your loans for a very long time before they officially go into default versus a deferment and forbearance, which are very, very similar. Really, the only difference is there are types and kind of the way they might capitalize interest on the loans. And some are automatic. Some you have a specific amount that you can get just for having a student loan without a qualifying reason. And deferments and forbearances are really good ways to avoid default if you're actually having problems making payments on your student loans. So whether it's because you just can't afford them right now, maybe you've been hit with maybe a big medical expense, or you're even just trying to pay off some other debt that you have, you can always call your student loan service provider and see what types of either deferment or forbearance that you qualify. And yes, those are very, very different than actually being in student loan default.
Well, what about people who may have been in default prior to the pandemic,
Mhm.
but then the pandemic hits and everybody kind of got ushered in
Mhm.
to deferment? And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was my understanding, is everybody, even people who were in default, who were behind on their student loans, got ushered into a deferment that then put them, I thought it did two things back then. One,
Okay.
obviously you weren't making monthly payments, but two, it brought you back to current, is the way I understood it.
Okay. And that's a really common that's really common that people understand it that way. If you were in default prior to COVID, the other thing about student loan default is your student loan actually leaves your service provider. So currently, if you have Nelnet, Aidvantage, Mohila, for example, that loan processor actually takes that loan and they transfer it back to the Department of Education. And they are the ones who do student loan default collection and resolution. So all they did there, they never went into deferment or forbearance if you were already in default. They just halted the collection process. Versus people who were paying on their loans
Mm.
and were still in good standing, they went into administrative forbearances because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, there, when payment was going to resume around October 2023, the administration, the Department of Education at that time, for a year, because they had what they call the on-ramp period to get people ready to repay, because the pause was really good for a lot of people, but we knew it wasn't going to last forever. And so they had what they called an on
Right.
ramp period for people who were going to go back into repayment. And the on ramp period was just a period of time that if you needed to get on a certain repayment plan, get a student loan payment back into your budget and figure that out. All that did, it wasn't that your payments weren't due, it's that they would not be subject to the same kind of default status or even going on your credit report at that time. And then for defaulted loans, they had what they called the fresh start period, which unfortunately ended in October 2024. And we can talk about if your student loans are in default, how you get them out.
Mm.
But back then, it was way easier in that fresh start program. You made a 10-minute phone call to the Department of Education. They asked you some questions and they just transferred it, pulled it out of default, threw it right back to your service provider. Then you would need to get on a repayment plan. Again, that ended October 2024. So getting out of default now looks a little bit different.
For those people who are truly in default, you would have
Mm-hmm.
had to have been behind on paying your student loans more than 270 days prior to the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, the Department of Education reacquired your loan from your service provider,
Mm-hmm.
but they did nothing to try to collect on it. And so you were just kind of in this pause. And you might
Mm-hmm.
have thought you were in deferment because everybody was in deferment or
Mm-hmm.
forbearance,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you weren't really. You
No.
you were still in default. You
Yes.
just weren't being collected on your default.
Correct.
Very interesting. I think kind of important nuance and details that are so uh, easy to misconstrue. I misconstrued them. But also because things are being thrown around and nobody's taking the time to actually explain things, and a headline, is, what, 15 words or less.
Sure.
It's certainly not telling the whole story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now those people are coming into, it's not even that they're coming out of some type of forbearance of, like, it's just that their default is now going back into a collection status, if you will. Is that a fair way of putting that?
Absolutely. So, in essence, things are just getting back to normal before, just like it was right before COVID. So, the student loan federal repayment system is normalizing on that aspect, at least, even though I know there's a lot going on in other student loan world. But when it comes to default, it's just kind of getting ready to go back to business as usual.
And business as usual means that the Department of Education, the federal government, is going to exercise some of the different levers that they have to try to collect on defaulted student loans. And one of the levers they've always had is that they can
Mhm.
either garnish your wages or seize your tax refund. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct. There are several options the federal government has. When you sign up for student loans and you sign your master promissory note, it talks about default in the process. But yes, they can garnish your wages up to 15%. If you get federal retirement or railroad benefits, those can also be seized. Your tax return up to 100% can be seized. And it actually says that you can have your driver's license suspended or other professional licenses suspended if you do go onto default.
Okay. And so that all sounds very scary, but we're We're here to minimize the fear around it. So if you were in default before, which again meant 270 days of being behind on your payments, this is
Mhm.
not for anybody who went into an administrative forbearance or any type of deferment program. Those meant that you were still current on your student loans, but that your student loans were being paused. This truly is for somebody who is behind, and it in the like you said, the government's just kind of getting back to normal. But what if somebody is in default and now they're worried that their wages are going to be garnished or that their tax refund is going to be seized? What can they do? How do they get themselves out of that mess?
Absolutely. And before we get there, I kind of want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
of the most common reasons why people go into default to begin with. So it's estimated about 5 million student loan borrowers are currently in default. And I think, again, we've had this conversation of just how complex student loans can be. And I would say a lot of people who go into default, they get their student loan payment, they can't afford it, but they don't realize there's all these other options. We've already talked about deferment. We've talked about forbearance. And there's a lot of income driven repayment programs where it's going to take your income, it's going to calculate a student loan payment that you can afford. And in some cases, if you're low income, you can literally get a $0 student loan payment, and that is the actual payment. And so I think that a lot of people who go into default kind of bury their head in the sand. It causes them a lot of anxiety. And so they just kind of ignore it, right? They ignore it till it gets to a point where you can no longer ignore it because at some point your wages are going to be garnished. At some point, your tax returns are going to be taken. And while that's very scary, it's also forcing many of these student loan borrowers to face what's not going away. And when it comes to student loans, they're very overwhelming and scary just because of the complexity. But I've heard you say, there's always something that you can do. And you definitely have a lot of options when it comes to your defaulted student loans. Back to business as usual if you did not take advantage of that Fresh Start program in 2023 and 2024. The two most common ways that you're going to get your student loan out of default. Number one, there's what they call a rehabilitation plan. And again, it's nothing to be scared of. You call the Department of Education. There's actually a website called myeddebt.ed.gov. You can even log in there. Give them a call. They are going to get some income information from you. They're going to have a conversation with you. And then you're going to get enrolled in a repayment plan, again, based off your income. You're going to complete that plan. You're going to pay every payment on time for 9 months. And if you do that, then your loan will be what we call fully restored, which means they didn't take it out of the default status. They send it back to a servicer. And then that opens the door again for things like deferment, forbearance, again, all the income driven repayment plans. A lot of students want to go back to school and they're also barred from taking new student loans if they have a student loan in default. So if you're looking to go back to school, it's a really good way to get that restored. The other benefit of the rehabilitation program is if it's been reported to your credit report, one of the incentives is they're then going to restore it and wipe it off your credit report like the default never happened. So that's another big benefit. The other way to get your student loans out of default, and kind of a more quick, immediate fix, if you have student loans out there, let's say you have 4 loans in default, you can go online on studentaid.gov. You can get a consolidation loan where they take those 4 loans, they put them together into one new loan. That immediately takes them out of default. Again, you're restored, you get on your payment plan, you're on your way, but that will not fix your credit report. So that's really important difference here is that it's going to remove that negative information from your credit.
Okay. So a couple of different options. I want to reiterate the website that you just shared because it's the only place I'm willing to go to get information about student loans, and that is studentaid.gov. Right there on that website, it'll tell you what's going on with legislation and
Mhm.
what is and is not changing. It right there talks about how to get back into good standing if you are in default. It talks about income driven repayment plans, how they're accepting applications for those again because they were on a pause. So I think knowing where to go, and it's certainly not the news headlines. Go to studentaid.gov for the best
Yes,
information.
absolutely.
Hey there, budgeteers. You know, good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So, what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and He cannot be in the presence of sin. So this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to Him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
Good. So let's shift gears from default a little bit and talk about income-based or income-driven repayment, because
Okay.
there has been a little bit of like, what's going on with those? Some programs went away. Did all the programs go away? Like, what's happening with income-driven repayment plans?
Well, it's changed a lot. And it's beginning to become more simplified. So that's a big plus, right? There were several different types of income driven repayment plans and pros and cons to each. And I think it's really important to talk about what is student loan law versus what's student loan policy. And student loan law is, let's say, a repayment plan, and the income based repayment plan is a really good example of it. It was enacted as a result of a law passed by Congress. So it's what we call codified into law. And so it's not that it couldn't change, but it's going to take an act of Congress to change it. And so it makes it a lot more difficult. Whereas the SAVE plan, which has been really popular since its introduction very recently, also had a lot of really good pros and some cons as well. But it was policy. So it was something the Department of Education, they did cite a law that they felt at the time gave them to power to create that certain income driven repayment plan, but it's now being challenged in court. So if you got on the SAVE plan, you would have been automatically put into forbearance. So right now, no payments are being asked from you. There's 0% interest, so that's nice. But if you are on the public service loan forgiveness program, or you've been on track to have your student loans forgiven at some point in time under one of the income driven repayment plans, that forbearance, it's not counting. And so that puts a lot of student loan borrowers trying to make decisions. Do I switch to a different kind of income driven repayment plan, like that income based repayment, so I can keep getting or moving forward with my forgiveness, or do I just wait it out? And so that has been a lot of questions that I've been getting lately, just what should I do? Again, I think it's really important to look at the overall picture. I mean, you have to know what your goals are, what your repayment amounts are going to be, what your budget look like. So all of those are really important factors, and it looks different for everybody on what they should do with their student loans if they are on the SAVE plan. Um, Income-driven repayment has also just been a little frustrating because there have been so many changes in the Department of Education. And so if you are on an income-driven repayment plan, you have to recertify your income annually, and you have a due date to do that. This year, those applications were taken off the website because of the court actions going on with SAVE, and they needed to do whatever they needed to do behind the scenes to try to get it updated. And so that was paused for a while. So if your certification date came up, you weren't able to recertify. And so there were some headlines about people who were having their student loan payment drastically jump to a standard 10-year repayment. But that's been taken care of now. They're not actually going to have to make those payments. They need to go on. The application's back online. And we've seen those recertification dates actually pushed out for up to a year or more. And you can check that by, again, going to your account on studentaid.gov to see when your recertification date is.
Excellent. Yeah, there's just so much going on, right? Even the fact that the federal government loves to use terms that sound very familiar, because there's income-driven repayment plans and the applications therefore. But one of those plans is the income-based repayment. So income-driven repayment, income-based repayment, like it is just maddening. But I think the point here is that there is still student loan programs that allow you to have a monthly payment that is based on your income. The applications are back up and running. So if you weren't able to recertify or apply in the past, you should be able to apply for or recertify now.
Correct.
Okay, so if I'm in default, I have a plan. If I am looking for my payment to be based off my income, I have a plan. In both cases, I go to studentaid.gov and or I just contact Renee because I need somebody to hold my hand through it. Hey there, budgeteers. It's a brand new year, and that means it's time for new habits, starting with your money. Take charge of your finances in 2025 with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is all about giving you the knowledge, tools, and support to make confident money moves and build a rock-solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kick off your journey to financial freedom. That's right, no strings attached. In this session, one of our expert coaches will help you to identify your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We'll help you master your money mindset, sharpen your money management skills, and keep you accountable every step of the way. Make 2025 the year you say goodbye to financial stress and hello to the freedom you've been dreaming about. Schedule your free discovery session today and start creating the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Let's talk for a moment about some of the other things that are whispers or things that are being shared in the headlines that people just don't need to concern themselves with because nothing has actually happened. So all the fear mongering, can we get rid of some of that?
Yeah, sure. So again, I talked about what is the difference between federal student loan policy versus law. And there are some bills in Congress right now to drastically overhaul the federal student loan system. But again, getting through Congress, the House, the Senate, that's a process. And it can change from, whatever administration it is from, term to term. And so right now they're going to pick out some more of the scary parts of those legislative bills, and they're going to put them in the headlines when we're not even close to getting there yet. So I think that's the scary part. It changes all the time, and there's always something new, something that's coming out about public service loan forgiveness changing, about the income-based repayment or income-driven repayment plans changing. I mean, it's pretty likely that I think the SAVE plan will go away. However, you still have income-based repayment. There's two versions of that, but those should still be active. There's pay as you earn. That one was actually set to be shut down in 2024, and that one has now been extended to new enrollments through July of 2027. And then there's also income contingent repayment. That one doesn't benefit a lot of people. It's really only used as the income-driven repayment plan for parent plus borrowers because it's the only one that they have available with that loan type. But again, there are so many options. And all you can do is sit and run the numbers, right? And if you can't afford the payment, even based on your income, again, we have those deferment and forbearance options. Gives you a time to make a plan, to work with a financial coach like Nino, get your debts paid off, get a budget together, and be prepared when that student loan or when you're ready to repay those student loans.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to address, you said that the SAVE program. So this was I think this was the program. You correct me where I'm wrong. I'm gonna see if my memory serves me here.
Okay.
So the SAVE program was the plan that was going to allow two things were going to happen. One, if you were making payments that were income based that didn't cover the full cost of the interest that was being charged, that you wouldn't have that negative amortization that you shared with us on the last episode, where your loan would never go down, but at least it wouldn't grow. That was part one of that. And
Absolutely.
then part two was this, what you call a tax bomb, where with certain programs, if you are forgiven at the end of 10, 20, or 25 years, whatever that forgiveness amount is, then becomes income. And I believe the SAVE program was going to avoid that as well. So it was going to avoid the balance increasing through negative amortization, and it was going to avoid the tax bomb. Did I get that right?
Part of it. So the first part, you got absolutely right. The SAVE plan was designed to stop that negative amortization situation. It's a tongue twister for me. And so we've talked about that in a previous episode, that your income-driven repayment amount can be less than the actual interest that's accruing on that loan every single month. And so while you're making monthly payments, instead of your balance going down, it's continuing to grow. And then at some point, if it's forgiven under an income-driven repayment program, which is different from public service loan forgiveness, I want to put that out there, there is something we call a tax bomb. Again, another quick little piece of legislation. Anyone forgiven under an income-driven repayment program before the end of this year, they actually are covered under the American Rescue Act, and there is no tax liability. But that expires at the end of this year. So if you're not looking for forgiveness for another 10 or 20 years, that tax bomb is potentially going to be there. Again, we have no idea what's happening tomorrow, so we don't know what's happening in 10 to 20 years, but that is as it stands currently. Public service loan forgiveness is different. Again, that one was codified into law, and the law does state that there is no tax consequence at the end of your repayment term under public service loan forgiveness. The other part of SAVE is that it was a different calculation. And so every single repayment plan under income-based repayment has a different forgiveness period, and it has a different calculation. So SAVE was the most generous of the calculation, where it took what we call 225% of your federal poverty level for your family size, and then it calculated your discretionary income above that, and then it turned around and divided that by either 5% income or 10% of income, or weighted depending if they were undergraduate or graduate loans, and that's how they came up with the new payment. So if somebody was on an income-based repayment plan, which again, it depends on when you took the loans. If you took the loans, prior to 2010, income-based repayment is 150% poverty line for discretionary income, and it's 15% of income off of that, if you took loans after July of 2010, then it's a same 150 poverty line, but then it's a 10% calculation on your discretionary income. So you can see how it can get very complicated. And these are, again, just a few of them. But you can see because the calculations are different. If I was on income-based repayment, and then I moved to save, then I would see my payment go down. The other pros and cons are also tax filing status. So one of the cons of the save plan was if my spouse and I decided to file our taxes separately, married filing separately, didn't matter. I would still have to claim as income in the payment calculation versus like the income-based repayment plan. If we file taxes separately, married filing separately, then only my income is counted toward the repayment of the student loan. So again, there's so many varying factors, and I always like to say I'm not a tax expert, so always recommend that you reach out to a tax professional to see if filing separately does benefit you if you're interested in that. But again, layers upon layers, right?
I heard somebody once say student loans don't work like any other kind of loan.
I don't know where you heard
They
that.
are ridiculous. They are ridiculous.
Yeah, they definitely do
oh my
not work
goodness,
like
the
any other
number of
debt that we're
programs.
familiar with.
Yeah, and the number of different programs, the way that each one operates differently, things are your monthly payment on income driven repayment is calculated differently for each program. It's maddening.
It is.
It's maddening. This is why I want to record with you and for our listeners, because and I think I think it's important that our listeners know that this is all coming to you as of April 29, 2025. So things can change on a dime, but
Yes.
I wanted to sit down with you, Renee, because I'm sick and tired of the headlines. I want people to be informed. I want them to be informed. Although it's a ton of information and it's in complete overwhelm, my hope and my prayer is that we've broken it down in a way where if you're in default, you have a plan and you can feel good about like, oh, okay, I don't have to be as worried. I have to take action. And if
Absolutely.
I'm on income driven repayment, I know that I have a plan. I just got to get onto studentaid.gov and either apply or recertify. And as far as all the other stuff, I think I liken it back to, I think in 2022, we were hearing student loan forgiveness, student loan forgiveness, student loan forgiveness. And everybody wanted to lead with, oh, your student loans are going to get forgiven. Your student loans are going to get forgiven. But all they were doing was reporting on proposed legislation, nothing that had actually taken place.
Absolutely.
And that's what is happening today. Is there's a lot of reporting on proposed legislation, not on what's actually taking place. So I wanted to address default. I wanted to address income driven repayment because those two things are currently happening and the rest of it is just a bunch of noise.
Right. And we have to remember anytime a bill is drafted and it's going to go through the process of getting approved and signed into law, there's always a first draft. There are a lot of voices. There's a lot of considerations. And so reporting on first drafts of bills and what that could look like, and it's important to stay informed, right? But we can't get caught up in that because it is changing all the time. And what a first draft of a bill is going to look like is almost always very different than what the last draft of a bill is going to be, if it even moves forward. So it's really important to try to, you want to stay informed, but not stress out about the what ifs because there's nothing you can do about the what ifs. What you can do is get a student loan plan. What you can do is pay attention. What you can do is get to know your loans and know your numbers and get it in writing in black and white. that way, if things do change, you already have the data that you need, you already understand, and you will be able to pivot so much more easily if you get the information that's very specific to you. And with any financial concern, at the end of the day, I'm also a financial coach, or that's how I started. And so we know money tends to cause a lot of anxiety. Debts cause anxiety. And you have all these layers of complications with student loans. And again, I think the most common reason people go into default is because they're avoiding them. They don't want to deal with the anxiety. It's stressful. We tend to make mountains out of molehills until we sit down and actually face it. And I would say 99% of the time, when I meet with clients, they leave feeling relieved. It's never as bad as they think it is. And having that concrete plan in front of them is what gives them that peace of mind that they can work forward and they're not going to be trapped in student loan debt forever.
Yeah, I've experienced that very thing, whether it's student loans or even just the normal everyday income versus expenses budget. It is that 99.99% of the people I've sat down with, the situation is much worse in their head than
Absolutely.
it is once they get it down on paper. And so, an encouragement to not put your head in the sand and not to avoid
Yes.
these things, but to engage and to find the path forward, that there is a path forward, that while these things can sound scary and ridiculous, and trust me, I know, like for me personally, I had $60,000 worth of student loan debt. My wife had nearly 40. So between the two of us, we were looking at $100,000 in student loan debt. That's crazy.
But not
I'm
uncommon.
happy to report that. Right. And I'm happy to report that, I think we're a little under 40 left to go. So we've paid off
Amazing.
60,000 of it, and and so it can be done. And I was somebody who was messing around with forbearances that capitalized the interest. I was messing around with income driven repayment where I was maybe barely covering the interest. So my balance was never going down. And finally, I just said, enough is enough. I'm not playing with these things anymore, and was able to take care of that a little bit back in 2019. In 2019, put it like consolidated, started over on the 10 years. I was not thrilled about that, but here we are 6 years later, and I know that I'm 60% of the way through this stuff. So
absolutely,
it can happen.
It absolutely can. And how does it feel to actually see those balances going down?
Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you. For my wife, it's under 15. Amazing. And like it's so close. I don't want to pay them off early in chunks. If I get to a point where there's enough in the bank to just pay it off and I'm out of the payment and all of that, like that's what I'm waiting for. And we're so close. We're so close to like, could I just write a check and like be done with that one?
Done?
And then the balance would be on mine, right? So what's 40 minus 15 would be like 25 on mine. And so to know that started up over 60 and now it's, under 25, I don't like the number. I'll be the first one to tell you, like, it'd be great if I got forgiveness and all of a sudden didn't have to worry about it. But no, there's a sense of empowerment and
Absolutely.
I'm finally slaying this dragon and getting it out of my life.
That's great. And I can just hear the excitement in your voice when you talk about it. So again, just more encouragement. This can be done. And also when you actually take action, you have a plan and the needle starts to move, empowering, but it feels really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other words of wisdom or encouragement you have for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Again, I would just say I know the media is has all different kind of headlines. Things are changing rapidly and things might change in the future. But again, there's always something that you can do. Information, education is power. And again, writing a plan out, seeing what your options are for your own specific student loan goals is really important. So when I meet with a client, I know we probably talked about this on the other episode, but yeah, it's your income, it's your family size, it's what your earning potential is in the future. Who do you work for? Do you qualify for any programs? But it's also personal to you. What are your goals? Are you somebody who doesn't care if I have to repay these for 20 years, if I save a ton of money? Or am I somebody who wants to never look at these again and get them out of the way as soon as possible? Am I somebody who has some other debt to work on? So maybe I need a lower payment right now. I'm going to slay that credit card debt or whatever medical debt you may have, and then I'm going to come back and get focused on these. Again, it looks so different for everybody. And as you know, Nino, I always tell people it's not my job to even really tell you what to do. Once I run the numbers, it usually becomes pretty clear to the borrower because my job is always to educate. I'm going to educate you on what your options are, and then it's your decision on how you move forward with that. But again, it can take away a lot of the anxiety and fear that you may have. And again, if things do change in the future, having that plan is going to make it a lot easier to pivot if needed.
Let me encourage everybody too that you don't have to necessarily wait for the next time that Renee is going to be on the New Money Habits podcast to get up to date and to stay informed. If you trust this trusted voice, like I trust this trusted voice, come check her out on Patreon, patreon.com/New Money Habits. They can also follow you on TikTok. Is that correct?
Yep. Student loan. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. Under the Student Loan Coach. And then, of course, my website, studentloancoach.com. So those are all places that you can find me. And I do offer a free 15-minute discovery call. So if you're not sure if I can help you or you just want to meet with me, ask me some questions, I'll get your student loan information. We can have a chat. It doesn't cost you anything. And then we can potentially see if, working with me is a good fit for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Renee, for spending time with us today to get us up to date and informed. And we'll be sure to have you back on with us again real soon.
All right. Sounds great.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.